Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Education Cabinet Decision meeting. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Is that any?
No apologies for absence.
No, we're all here. That's good. Second one, declarations of members' interests.
Just the usual for me, Academy Advisory Board at Penhale Infants.
Yeah, the usual ones for me, although slight amendments to that. My partner works at Mayfield School as a dance teacher. My daughter attends Mayfield School, or the preschool there, and I work for a supply agency, although currently not in a Portsmouth school.
Thank you. And I am the Vice Chair of the Governors at Queenswater. Sorry, I had to think there. Usual ones. Okay, with no... Oh, sorry. Yes, introductions. Yes, good idea. Introductions. Let's go around the table.
Councillor Tom Coles, Opposition Spokesperson from the Labour Party.
Councillor Terry Norton, Opposition Spokesperson for Conservative.
We're all...
Alison Edgerton, Group Accountant with the responsibility for schools.
Angela Mann, I'm Finance Manager for Children's Families and Education.
Julia Catherine, Head of Inclusion within Education.
Caroline Corcoran, Head of Sufficiency, Participation and Resources in Education. Lisa Gallagher from Democratic Services.
Okay, and Caroline has drawn my attention to the fact that there's a few other things that I didn't do before. I was raring to get on with the agenda, which is talk about the housekeeping, which I think we all know, but just to, so that we are reminded. There's no planned fire alarm. If it goes off, please evacuate the room by the stairwells. Don't use the lift, and assemble in front of Queen Victoria. This meeting is live web streamed. And there is a fixed camera at the back of the room, and members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting, but there aren't any here, although I do welcome Fiona from the news and Joe, who's one of the other councillors in Paulsgrove. Okay, now I'll get back to the agenda. So the item 3 is the Schools Modernisation and Sufficiency Programme, and that is being delivered by Caroline.
Hello. This is a standard report that we present every quarter, and just to update you on exactly what's happening with our capital programme in education, which covers the modernisation and sufficiency of school places. So in terms of our condition projects, you'll see in section 3 that we have some additional condition projects that we have approved for this year. The appendix that goes with this report shows that we are doing works at Copner Primary, Fernhurst Junior, Wimborne Junior and Southsea Infant, and we've also done some work at Cumberland as well. The Cumberland project was quite a short project, so it has sort of come onto the dashboard and then come off the dashboard as a completed project since the last meeting. The other 4 projects are still ongoing projects with works happening during the rest of this year. The other thing is that we've done some minor works this quarter, which include disability access at Trafalgar School, exploratory work around roof leaks at the Lantern, and we are planning to do some groundworks at Mayfield School that are quite modest. So in terms of the condition works, everything is either completed, in progress on the timescales that we would expect it to be, and there are no significant risk issues to report. Section 4 looks at the secondary sufficiency schemes. We refreshed our school place planning over the summer, and we can see that secondary numbers in the city are forecast to fall from 2025-26 academic year. So we do still have some pressure on school places. We've been putting in a lot of extra places at Trafalgar School, Admiral Lord Nelson School, Charter Academy, the Portsmouth Academy and St Edmunds, because the numbers are going up, but we will reach a point where that stabilises as we get nearer to 2025. We will need to do probably some interim works to cover off 2023-24 and 2024-25 academic years, and then after that there should be sufficient capacity in the city. However, this is always affected by housing growth, so we will keep that under review. If there's significant housing growth, that may change the position. In terms of paragraph 4.3, we're talking about the Wimmering School for pupils with autism, and there are some costs associated with that build, even though the main project is covered by the Department for Education. There's a minor cost there in relation to relocating the play equipment and skate ramp, and so that's mentioned there as a cost that we will need to fund out of the capital programme. In terms of section 5, we're looking at primary sufficiency. Our forecasting is showing that primary numbers have sort of stabilised and are now the trend is starting to dip down again, always subject to housing developments changing that over time. So at the moment, we don't need to do any further works to increase the capacity at primary level. There was capital funding allocated to support the change to deliver 30 hours early years provision, and that's been allocated to Rainbow Corner Nursery, Little Cherubs and St Swithin Sunbeams. And also there's funding to support the amalgamation of Wimborne Infant and Wimborne Junior schools, which will allow us to do some minor works there, such as providing a single entrance to the newly combined school, providing a covered walkway between the two buildings, and also allowing enhancing the size of the hall so that all the pupils can be located in the hall at one time. In terms of special school sufficiency, we're continuing to see an increase in demand for special needs places, and this is a major focus for us in terms of the work that we do around sufficiency. We have done one review of accommodation, which gives us a significant amount of information. However, we do need to do some further work so that we can determine a master plan for the city and the exact solutions that we need to deliver our inclusion strategy across the city, and that work is ongoing. In terms of the dashboard, the only risk that's highlighted as an amber thing on the dashboard is Admiral Lord Nelson, where we are doing the expansion works which are required for September 2020, and there have been some delays there. That has been due to scaffolding on site from a completely separate bid that the school put in to get their roof done because they're an academy. So it was paid for out of the academy's condition improvement fund, but the scaffolding, that project got delayed, so the scaffolding didn't come down at the time it should have done, and that has led to a delay in our project because we couldn't do what we needed to do. But we are working with them, and we're still confident that we can have a solution in place and have the works completed by the end of September 2020, and we're looking at a sort of contingency plan B for September. And that is really everything I wanted to report, but I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any questions.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Any questions? Yep.
Me, so just on the lantern, so the roof, there's a leak in the roof in the lantern, is that right?
Yeah, there is a leak there at the moment.
Okay. And that's come after the work that was done?
Yeah, the work we didn't do any works on the roof.
Okay.
Those works that we did were inside the building.
Yeah.
So that was about, the works that we did last year, last summer, was all about really doing the inside of the building. But what we've now got is we've got a few leaks, so we need to get somebody up there with a cherry picker to have a look and see what we can repair. We think it's probably 2 or 3 minor patch repairs is what we believe is required.
So, because we spent over £1 million on that for
Yeah.
14 students over 3 years, and we still think there's continuous work to be done, is it likely to have future issues, or is this going to be a simple fix?
It's not a good quality building. So it was the only building that we had available at the time to actually put the pupils in, and therefore what we've done is effectively we've built a building inside a building with partition walls and those sorts of things, but it was always intended that it would be a temporary solution. And as part of the master plan in relation to SEND provision that we're looking at the moment, that includes not just covering the increase in numbers of places that we need for new SEND pupils, but also the relocation of pupils out of not just the Lantern, but also the Craneswater Annex, because both of those buildings are not good buildings in terms of their substantial structure.
I guess the point I'm making, or what I'm trying to get at, is this going to be a money pit over the next 3 years, where we keep having to patch it up time and time again, and that figure goes from being well over £1 million to potentially, 2 million?
I think it's inevitable that on those two sites there are going to be maintenance costs over the next few years. Obviously, we're going to try and minimise that as much as we can.
Thank you.
I think it's a fair point. When I saw it as well, I thought we've just spent that money, but I think that the key point is to say that the £1 million was actually not spent on the main fabric of preserving the building, but serving a purpose that we had. But I thought exactly the same thing. It was like bad timing, but not beyond the realms of possibility given
No,
the state of the building.
I think it's also fair
Yeah.
to say we've had quite a lot because the rain has been.
Yeah.
We've had a particularly wet period, which has actually caused issues in a number of schools.
Yeah. Any other comments anyone wants to make? No. So thank you very much, Caroline, for that very good, thorough and well-explained report. Thank you. Are you going? Oh, I was going to say thank you at the end, because this is your last meeting, yes? So I just would like to place on record my thanks to Caroline for all of the amazing work she's done, and also the quality of her reports and things at these meetings. I'm sure you'll agree, make it very, very, very good. So thank you very much, and good luck with whatever you choose to do next. Thank you. Okay. So the next item on the agenda is, make sure I get my thing right, yes, here we go, is the Education Portfolio Budget Monitoring Report for the second quarter. Angela?
Hi. The report's for noting the financial forecast as at the end of September 2019, and the table at paragraph 4.2 sets out the latest position on the revenue account, which was a projected overall overspend of £367,000. Further details set out in the paragraphs 4.3 to 4.9, but the biggest area of overspend is £312,000 on home to school transport, and there's a separate report on that later, item 8. And slightly helping to offset overspends is the early help and prevention, with an underspend due to some staffing vacancies. It's envisaged that the portfolio reserve will have to be used, but it only partially offsets the overspend for this year. And the service recognises that any overspends will need to be contained or carried forward, and officers are working to identify savings where they can. The report also covers the capital position that Caroline's already gone through in a lot more detail, but the position at the end of September showed an underspend of just under £22,000 against a total approved funding of £88 million.
Okay. So, as you say, the biggest budget pressure is homeschool transport, which we've got a paper on. So, given that, are there any other questions on this? No, I think it's quite. Oh, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I guess it may tie into. Sorry, it may tie into the next one really, but I think it's important as we, when we're talking about funding, especially some of this funding that looks like it goes to schools forums. Is that this one or the next one?
No, that's the DSG.
I'll leave it for the minute.
Yeah,
So that all seems in shape.
This is the money that the council allocate to the education portfolio.
Fine.
So
Okay.
the DSG one's slightly different.
Yeah.
Okay, but obviously you can't separate out all these issues, tease them out, but there are different budgets. But it's fair enough. Tom, do you want to say anything? No. Okay, so let me come back to this. So I need to. It's a report for noting, yes. So I don't have to read it all out. We'll note that report. Thank you very much. So item 5, the DSG, the designated schools grant, 2018-19 quarter 2 budget monitoring. Is this Alison?
Good afternoon. The report sets out the forecast budget position for the dedicated schools grant at the end of the second quarter for 1920, which is at the end of September 2019. The budget was approved in January 19, and there have been subsequent revisions in July 2019. Overall, there is an overspend of £367,000, an increase of £330,000 from quarter 1, and that's currently being met through the use of the carry forward. The overspend mostly relates to the Element 3 top-up for mainstream schools for pupils with high needs, pupils placed in outer city providers with high needs, and also includes the early years provision, in particular an increase in the 3 and 4-year-olds following receipt of the summer term class lists. The overspends have been partially offset, I say, through the use of the underspend on other areas, and they are set out in the report. In the case of the early years, we have used the contingency to help manage that overspend. The report also sets out changes to the DSG funding, which allocation in July, which relates to the early years block and the high needs block, and this follows the import-export adjustment for pupils with high needs and also the update for the census for January 19 for pupils on early years. And finally, the report asks the Cabinet member to note the forecast position and endorse the proposed changes to the DSG as set out in paragraphs 3.30 and 3.31. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Do you have a question or still a comment?
No questions.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Go-
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
the only
go
thing
for
I
it.
would understand, I think it's in the nature of certainly what we've seen this week with full council and what have you, is that where we constantly see, and this is no criticism of Councillor Coles at all, but certainly his colleagues, his MP and friends in the Teaching Education Union, for one, who can't seem to resist, attacking the government school funding at all. I think in light of that, I think it's important to note that, the figures that we saw from Heads Forum, which say that the government are planning to spend next year 2.6 billion extra on education, in the following year 4.8 billion, and then to follow on from that 7.1. So while we always would want more funding for education, I think I'm hopeful that with the change of government and the kind of things that we're seeing, that this funding is going to continue to be increased, and hopefully we'll see the benefits of that in the near future. I know that yesterday we were speaking at Schools Forum and we heard about the funding that increases that we're seeing there. So it's never going to be enough. I think it's always important to say that we always want more money for education, but there are signs that this is starting to happen.
Thank you for that. And anything you can do, Councillor Norton, and feeding back to your party for extra money, we would love.
I'm not sure I have that much clout, but I can certainly stress the case.
And it's fair to say that the money that came this year has helped this year. And
I think so.
What was looking at a really dire situation, we received, I think it was about 3 million all told, was it? About in terms of the funding for special educational needs.
That's for next year.
That's for next year.
For next financial year.
Yeah, so for the next
Yes.
financial year, but it will tide us over.
Yeah, for me it's about the
absolutely.
rhetoric, I think, and getting away from the doom and gloom when, we are seeing increases in the funding and money, is starting to come.
I think it's fair to say that there is still, across the country, significant pressure when you look at the projected numbers of special educational needs, and I don't think we can for 1 second be complacent. However, any amount of money towards
We
research
welcome the
is
additional
very
funds,
welcome. Yeah. Okay. Anything else to say on that particular item? No? Nope. We're all okay. So, yes, note the forecast year-end budget position for the DSG as of the 30th September 2019, and approve the necessary adjustments to the DSG to reflect the early years budgets as detailed in those paragraphs. So thank you very much. Thank you, Alison. You're not leaving, are you? You've got another. So the next item is item 6, which is targeted short breaks, which I believe Julia is presenting there.
I am, thank you. If it's okay, I'm going to start at section 3 and just talk through the rationale for the recommendations, then come back to the recommendations at the end. So it was agreed at Cabinet meeting on the 24th of July that we would undertake some engagement activity and look at some proposals for managing the budget pressures on the targeted short breaks provision. So we undertook a consultation with all of those families who currently receive prepaid cards in particular on a number of proposals which are set out in section 4. So we wrote directly to all of those families, 540 families in September to seek feedback, and we also undertook some co-production work with the Shaping Better Futures Together Parents co-production group in November, again to seek that feedback on those proposals. The response rate is set out in section 6. It was quite low. and generally that's in response rates, that's where there's not strong opinions either way, but the responses that we did get were very helpful, and we've used those to reflect on the proposals that were originally put forward in order to identify the recommendations to come back to this meeting. The reasons for needing to look at this, the pressures on this budget are, as already has been mentioned, there is a significant increase in the city in children with an education, health and care plan, so there's a growing need in the city, and that is increasing the number of children who have a statutory eligibility, who meet the eligibility criteria, for the prepaid cards. So the aim of the proposals that we were putting forward was to try and ensure that we could continue to deliver this service within the budget available. And it's just important to note in 7.2 that prepaid cards is one part of our targeted short break offer. The other parts of the offer are set out in 7.2, so it's Specialist Holiday Play Scheme, Inclusive Holiday Play Scheme, Teenage Project, Teenage Holiday Play Scheme, Youth Hub and Gym Club. And this is just about the targeted offer, so none of this relates to the specialist short break offer, which is delivered by social care colleagues, subject to an assessment. So Section 8 sets out the options considered and why we've ended up with the recommendations that we have. So the first proposal was that we set the value of the prepaid cards every year dependent on the estimated number of applications, and we are recommending that that proposal is that we go ahead with that proposal. So obviously the number of applications that we get each year can fluctuate, and if we have a set figure that is allocated to prepaid cards, that makes it quite difficult to deliver that within the budget that is available. So what we're proposing is that the value of the cards will be set based on the known applications in February for the following financial year, and then an estimate for October, so there's 2 points in the year when applications can be processed. That's the first recommendation. Second recommendation was that we also give families, as well as having a prepaid card, the option of a family card, which gave them a discount on a number of activities that they could use their card payments on. And actually the feedback we received, the majority of the views was that wasn't of particular benefit to families. They would prefer to have the choice and control themselves about how they spend the money allocated to the prepaid card. So we're not recommending that we go ahead with that proposal. The next proposal was that prepaid cards were only available to those families who are not also accessing a specialist short break. So as I said, the targeted short break offer is separate to the specialist short break offer, which usually includes respite, overnight respite provision at beachside, for example, and families who access specialist short breaks. They have an allocated social worker who will do an assessment of the family's needs and allocate a package of support based on that assessment. That can be, depending on the needs, obviously the assessed needs, that can be quite a significant package of support, obviously based on the needs. What we want to do is make sure that the maximum number of families could benefit from having some form of short break provision. So in order to avoid that duplication between the specialist offer and the targeted offer, we're recommending that, and in line with what a number of other authorities are doing, that the targeted offer is only eligible to families who don't also receive the specialist offer. Next recommendation is that families should apply annually for their prepaid cards. So currently, once a family has applied, they would stay eligible for that for the prepaid card. It would just be issued every year, but actually sometimes the eligibility can change. So if families apply every year, then that makes sure that we are again giving the money to those that are eligible for it, and families in the consultation were generally in agreement with that. And then lastly, we were proposing that we top up the prepaid card twice a year rather than once a year. but actually, based on the feedback we received from families, we're not proposing that we go ahead with that. One of the things that families choose to spend their card money on is the summer holiday play scheme, and it wouldn't enable them to do that if we were topping up twice a year. So there's just 3 proposals that we are recommending go ahead. They're set out in section 2, so that the value of the prepaid cards is set every year, dependent on the estimated number of applications, that prepaid cards are only available to those who are not already accessing a specialist short break package, and thirdly, that families have to apply for a prepaid card annually.
Thank you very much, Julia, for that. It's really complicated. The amount of times I've had to explain it to people, the provision and how it sort of pans out, and the language around it. So thank you very much. It's as clear as it possibly could be. Are there any questions? Yes.
So in terms of the process, how difficult would the process be to apply for these cards for a family?
So the process is that we seek applications in February each year, ready for the following financial year, so we get those cards set up. So the money is then allocated to the card from April. So we have that process. We're already doing that, and then we let families, new families who are eligible, know when their education, health and care plan is finalised.
Okay, so if I'm a family member and that's how I have a letter coming through saying this is offered to you, you can access this service.
Yes.
Is it an incredibly complicated, long-winded council-based bureaucratic form,
No.
or is it quite simple?
No, it's very, very
It's quite
simple.
simple.
Yeah.
And then the second question, if that's okay, is the expectation of numbers. Has any work been done to look at how many we're expecting to get? Is it likely to scare people off? Because my fear here is that this process, if you don't know about it, or if if we're not getting much response from consultation, then it says to me that people don't really like responding to the consultation, and it could miss a family here. So, families across the city who expect to get this because they've had it every single year will lose out because they've missed the process, and therefore that feels to me like a little bit like we're reducing the numbers, not intentionally, but it's a barrier, and therefore it could be a way of reducing the number of applicants.
So the number of applicants has grown every year,
Yeah.
and that's partly because there are more children who are eligible, and it's partly because we're getting better at getting that message out to families. So, as I said, as part of finalising their education, health and care plan, we tell all families about their eligibility to apply. Not all families choose to apply, but the majority do. And then, sorry, I've forgotten the second part of your question.
Okay,
So
yeah,
the
I guess it was
numbers are
about
increasing.
the numbers. Are we expecting the numbers to decrease if you've got to apply for it, opt in as opposed to opt out? I guess.
Yeah. So currently they have to apply, but just once, and then what we're asking them to do is just to reconfirm that they still would like the card each year. So it's not an assessment. It's not a long-winded process. It's a simple application. Oh, the other thing I was going to say was we write to all those families directly.
Okay.
So the letter went out to all of those 540 families directly, and any changes, obviously, we'd make sure that we communicated with them directly. We did get quite a few phone calls, so that does indicate to me that people received the information, and they were asking questions, clarifying, but we didn't get a huge amount of feedback to the proposal. So it wasn't that people weren't getting the information, they just, for whatever reason, didn't respond to the proposals.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, I think it feels like, we're saying it's not a cut, right? So this isn't a cut to a service because the number of people that are accessing it is increasing, but it feels like it's coming from the wrong area, and this is no reflection on you at all, Susie. I think you do a fantastic job, that, but I think this is something where I think if I were in that position, I'd be banging down the leader of the council's door saying, what are we doing to find more money for this? And we often hear about the previous administration and their income generation strategies and the criticism there, but I'd be thinking surely this is something that the administration should be looking to go out and generate income for, because this is going to be a reduced service. And again, it ties into the themes, some of the themes that are certainly on my radar at the moment, of cutting services or reducing services for the most vulnerable. So it doesn't sit pretty with me. And I think this is definitely a really strong case for the kind of thing that I'd be saying, surely we can be generating some revenue through the council for this. And I don't what the plans are there, but to me it feels like a fairly valid point.
Okay. All right. Interesting point. So I have a few points to make on which, and I'll come to that point that you make as well. So the first thing is I want to place on record my thanks to officers for coming up with this very, very thorough report, and also to obviously the parents and everyone who's engaged in it, and the consultation with Portsmouth Parent Voice, with the co-production group, which actually went along to the activity because I realised that this is a really, really important decision. You know, all the decisions are important, but this one's particularly important, and I wanted to actually be meeting the people who are engaged with this. And actually, there's some really positives in here around some of the mechanisms for applying. So the bits that I think are worth drawing attention to is the fact that it is a budget pressure which has come from a changing landscape with no increase in money. So this is again part of the narrative that we've been talking about. This is the same across the country, but this is a pressure, and actually, as you quite rightly highlighted, that what we're trying to do is to preserve that amount of investment in this, but it's having to be stretched further and looking at it.
Sorry, Susan, can I interject? Is that okay?
Yes, if you want to make a point. I'm going to continue.
Yeah, no,
I might
please.
answer your questions as I go on.
Okay, do you want me to wait till the end? I'm happy to.
Yeah, because what I was going to say is we're committed to maintaining that level of funding and not actually cutting it. I also want to give my support to part of the reports where they talk about the value being set annually, because I think this is a really, really good way of really keeping on top of it and drilling down and looking at what people's needs and entitlements are when it comes to this. Particularly, we're talking about the card rather than just the targeted short breaks provision, which of course has got a wider accessibility. And I think the laudable aims of this are that actually there are a lot of families who miss out on this because of the way the money is spent at the moment, and I think that expanding it to include other families who have that eligibility is really important. However, you'll probably be pleased to hear what I'm saying, is I also am not happy particularly with recommendation B. And the main reason is that what I try and do when I make a decision is to trace that decision through to the families of the people at the end of the decision, and see what impact this has on them. And obviously, people are in unique circumstances, but on 2 occasions when I did that, I met families. You made reference to full council. There was a whole notice of motion about a particular family's case in full council this week, not to do with this, to do with something else. And I think it's really important that we actually do trace back and look at the impact. And there were a couple of families that I met where I felt, and these were people who had the entitlement to the beachside, that the cut of the card would have a really negative impact on their quality of life at the moment, albeit, interestingly, the reasons they said they're in that situation were more to do with the austerity issues and their cuts to other entitlements that were allowed to. However, focusing on this, they gave me examples of things they would no longer be able to do in terms of their respite, and therefore what I'm proposing to do is to take this further and look for other ways of managing particularly the situation of those people who arguably are in the most vulnerable situations. I think it's worth saying that I also met families where that is not the case, who are happy to say, actually, I get this and I can still afford to send my children to the specialist play scheme provision. But all the time that there are families who would be vulnerable to this, I think I cannot approve recommendation B. Okay, so I think that's the main points that I want to make. I don't know whether that impacts on what you're saying.
No, I think yeah,
I just thought you might be going there, so I thought if I
no, certainly no. It helps
what
to
I'm
understand
saying.
that you're not going to recommend that, so that's
it's
fine.
A and C, I think, are really pragmatic and sensible ways of going forward, where we can get a real idea of application, how many people are entitled to go through. The annual application, I think, is a worthwhile one to check in once a year, and so what I'm going to recommend is that A and C start, because we need to get those administrative systems in place, and there needs to be some more investigation into whether those families who end up having an either-or situation, whether that can be reviewed. Great.
I'm going to have to nip off in a sec because I've got a doctor's appointment, which is why I haven't spoken much today, sorry.
Okay. All right then. Okay, that's fine. Any more comments? No. Okay, any comments from anyone else? Okay, so if I can find my piece of paper. So when it comes to item 6, I agree. I agree to A and C, but we need to relook at B. Okay, thank you. But I do want to emphasise the effort and really excellent level of what's the word about it? My brain's gone as well today. Engagement, that's the word. Engagement with families on this particular issue. It was very, very thorough. Thank you. Are you going to go? Sorry, I forgot to mention that Alison had arrived.
Apologies for being late, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, Alison Jeffrey, Director of Children's Services.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is 7, which is the school revenue funding arrangements 2020 to 2021.
The report outlines the background changes to the operational guidelines for dedicated support grant and the progress that's been made towards the initial determination of the DSG budgets, of which high needs and early years will be coming back at a later meeting. The report seeks approval for the final submission of the mainstream schools funding pro forma to the Education Skills Funding Agency by the 21st of January. And the proposals did go to Schools Forum yesterday on the 15th of January. There's a number of recommendations for approval, and then there's also recommendations for endorsements, which then Schools Forum have the ability to approve. So the first recommendation for approving is to approve the proposed changes to the mainstream schools revenue funding formula set out in section 7, which distributes the mainstream DSG in line with the national funding formula with a slightly higher lump sum than set in the guidance. It's also to approve the school revenue funding pro forma at Appendix 4 for the submission to the Education Skills and Funding Agency by the 21st of January this year. To approve the budget to be held centrally for the payment of central licences, which have been negotiated nationally for schools by the Secretary of State. And also to approve the disapplication requests as set out in Section 8. And then there's following endorsements to carry forward the final balance of the school-specific contingency fund from financial year 2019-20 to 2020-21, and to be used for the same purposes as this financial year. It's to endorse the growth fund criteria for 2021 and also the increase in the secondary values as set out in Appendix 4. And finally, it's to endorse the budgets to be held centrally, which is Schools Forum, admissions, and for the duties retained by the local authority for all schools.
We were there yesterday, weren't we? So at Schools Forum yesterday. So I'm happy to approve those relevant points and endorse the other 3 rather than reading it through again completely. Thank you very much, Angela. That's very, very useful. Okay, so now we come on to the final item, which is the home-to-school transport, which Julia's doing as well.
This is me.
Thank you.
So this is for noting, and the report outlines the pressures on the homeschool transport budget and the actions that have been taken to address those. So in terms of the background, the Education Act 96 places the duty on local authorities to provide homeschool transport for eligible children. That includes children with special educational needs, which, as we've heard already, that is a number of children that are growing in the city. It's also children living outside of statutory walking distance, as well as some children in receipt of free school meals. So there are other children as well, but the majority are those with special educational needs, and some post-16 students. Moving on to 3.3, this section sets out the pressure that this particular budget has been under over a number of years. So you'll see the table goes from 2015 up to 2020 in terms of the budget that's allocated, the actual amount that's had to be spent dependent on the number of statutory or eligible children, and therefore the overspent and the percentage of that. So it sets out actually that the spend that's been required to deliver this requirement has been fairly static, fairly stable. It's only varied by less than 1% in those 4 financial years. So the reasons for the pressure, there is the increase in the numbers of pupils who meet statutory eligibility criteria. Since the SEND reforms came in in 2014, we have seen an increase in children that have been identified as having special educational needs, and actually these are, the increase that we're seeing has also been seen nationally. So nationally, the total national spend has increased by 6.5% over that period of time. And 83% of councils are also overspending on their homeschool transport budgets. Moving to section 3.6, so back in May 2014, we undertook a big revision of our homeschool transport policy, and we had consultation with stakeholders, and we wanted to make sure that we were delivering as efficient, the service as efficiently as possible. And the result of that, or one of the outcomes of that, was that there was a decrease in the number of discretionary cases that were agreed, but over that period of time there has been a significant increase in the number of statutory eligible children. So actually, even though we went through some major changes at that point in time, the amount of funding required to deliver this requirement of us has still remains. Section 3.7 sets out the reasons that I've just alluded to. So yes, there's an increase in the number that meet the eligibility criteria, increasing numbers of children actually with the most complex needs in the city, which is what we're seeing, and also the impact of creating the additional specialist provision. So the work that Caroline has done, creating specialist provision at Vanguard Centre, for example, that does have a knock-on effect in terms of the transport budget, because then we're having to transport people further to access that provision. So despite those challenges, 3.8 sets out the comparison between Portsmouth and our statistical neighbours in terms of our spend on home to school transport, and you'll see that actually we're a lower spender on home to school transport than most of our stat neighbours, and also compared to nationally. So we do deliver this service in a very cost-effective way, but the need has grown and the budget hasn't alongside. Section 4 talks about the SEND reforms, which I've already alluded to. So we've had an increased burden on this budget, in particular 19 to 25-year-olds. So pre to the SEND reforms, the education service where this budget sits would not have had any responsibilities in relation to children over statutory school age. The SEND reforms changed that, young people who are aged between 19 and 25 can still request assistance to get to college, for example, and actually those requests go to adult social care. The assessment is undertaken by adult social care, but the budget sits in education, and there's been no increase in that budget. Over 100,000 of
Yeah.
the overspend actually relates to
Yeah.
those assessments which are not within the control of the education service. So the current position is that a number of actions have been taken to try and manage this budget, but we are still overspending, and there's a projected overspend again for this current year. We've been able to cover the overspend with surplus, but this is potentially the last year that we'll be able to do that because of the tightness of other budgets. So we're looking again at the actions that we can take going forward to try and manage this pressure, and Section 6 sets out the things that we're doing. We're again reviewing the policy, so we're seeking feedback at the moment on the policy to look at whether there's anything further that we can do. Obviously, the statutory entitlement is set out in national guidance, but there may be other things that we can do, in particular in terms of the way that transport is delivered. So we're really keen to work with our special schools, for example, to work towards children being able to travel with greater independence.
Yeah.
So independent travel training, because we know that young people want to be able to travel independently by the time they reach college and leave school. We obviously want to review with parents the arrangements for their child to see what we can do to support them in that aspiration to become more independent in their travel. We're also looking at reviewing our transport routes, and we're also looking at commissioning recommissioning transport providers to make sure that we've got a really healthy market in terms of the provision, and we're working with an external provider, Adam, to help us do that. It's something they've done with other local authorities. However, as it states in 6.2, if we're not able, through all of those actions that are outlined, to sufficiently contain costs within the current budget, we will need to review options. So at the moment it's for noting that that's the current position, and obviously we hope that will have an impact, but if not, we'll need to reconsider the options at that stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Julia. And I think it's worth pointing out that, because I went away from when I first read the report with this notion about the amount of money that was contributing to the overspend from adults. Now, it doesn't actually make, they're all young people accessing education, and that's the most important thing. But when you look at some of the other things that have been shaved in order to constantly fill this black hole, I think it's worth, that's going to give us some weight when we come to actually, because it would be lovely to think that we could, with this nice plan, that it could be sorted, but realistically, I think we're looking at a pressure moving forward, and therefore that information around what the education have done already to really try their best at actually avoiding that overspend, plus the extra responsibility in a way that's come from adults, young people. I think they're really key parts of the narrative, when we actually come and look at this. However, some really positive actions that are being taken, and I think one of the things that doesn't come through on that, but I think has got some traction perhaps when we talk with parents, is the environmental impact as well. So as well as looking at independence and also working with parents about looking at alternatives, I think there is an appetite now for more consideration about the environmental impact of having 1,000 taxis driving around the city. So thank you very much for that. Yes.
Yeah, so just a few questions from me. The first one is on the budget, so how the budget works. So in terms, the budget's set, right, but there's nothing to stop, the council putting additional funds into that budget. Is that right? It's not a protected budget that can't be tweaked or anything like that. It's just
part of the education budget.
It's part of the education budget. Okay, and then the second was so we spoke about the walking bus, didn't we? So when we first started, there's some fantastic ideas with the walking bus, and in my head I'm thinking that this is individual taxis during rush hour, which is a fantastic, cash cow for a taxi driver with a set fare twice a day during rush hour. But I'm trying to think beyond that into mini buses and things like that. And I think as far as we know, where we have to, because it's a statutory requirement, schools do use minibuses and a really cost-effective way of doing it. So I think what I'm getting at is, of the those that use it, what percentage do we know are non-statutory? So could walk, could cycle if provided with a bike, or use a service, a different service, a public service. Because we go back to that, we're a flat island city, you can get anywhere in X amount of time. So of the strain, how much of it is really be out of our control, I guess, is the question.
So table 3 on page 79 sets out the over time the numbers of children who have a statutory eligibility. So statutory children transported was 419 in 2014-15. It's now 524. So statutory eligibility is about children who, in terms of SEN, will never be able to walk to school independently. Then you'll see the next column, the exceptional circumstances, which includes the 16 to 19-year-olds, has gone down from 266 down to just 84. So that's the bit we've been able to impact on. And then the 19 to 25-year-olds is set out in the next table. So the number of statutory children has increased. But having said that, the way that transport is, so we have a statutory requirement to assist with travel to school, but the way that that's done is dependent on the child's needs. So some children have very complex medical needs and maybe wheelchair users, and they have to be transported in specialist adapted vehicles. Some children will be perfectly able to travel using a bus pass, particularly as they're older and they've had travel training and are able to do that. So we have to provide the assistance, but it could be through a bus pass. Some children will travel on a minibus, in a group of children on a minibus, and that's where we need to look at the routes to make sure that we're doing that as efficiently as possible. And then there are some children, possibly because of their particular needs, so you might have a child with autism who really struggles to be in a minibus with other children, and that creates huge anxiety for them. There are some children who might need an individual taxi. So wherever possible, we're trying to enable children to travel in the most appropriate way to school, but also a way that supports and encourages their independence wherever possible.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm, it's really nice to see the sort of plans and the way that we're looking at this. I'm quite excited about to see how some of these roll out. So thank you very much, Julia, for that.
So just a quick one from me, Susie, if I can again. Sorry, if that's okay. So what we're saying here is that the need has grown, but the budget hasn't. So again, I'm thinking, we've got an issue with a budget there. What do we do? Well, you can either cut it, which is clearly not an option here because that's the last thing we'd want to do, or invest in it. So 87% of councils across the country are finding the same sort of issues, but so they're either spending more money on it from another area or they're generating income to negate it. Is that right? So I guess the question is, why aren't we? Or are we?
I don't think that it's a situation that is not without consideration. I mean, I don't know the specific answer to that. And obviously there's competing pressures on not just the education budget, on other budgets as well. I take your point. I do believe, this has been going on for many, many years, yes? It's not like the last few years.
No, I can see it's a snowball.
I think we have been, and obviously a simple solution is, well, then just say your budget is twice as big, but we know that that's not going to happen or be an easy solution. So we're just investigating as much as possible how we can reduce that pressure on that. Thank you. Any other comments? No. Okay. Well, I think that brings us to the. Obviously, I note that report. That's what I had to do on that one. So that brings us to the end of the agenda. Thank you very much for the discussions, and thank you very much for the reports. And have a good evening. Thank you.